You had a lot of things going on over there, and if something went bang, 25% of the time it came from right here in Amatol. And if you've seen some of these pictures where they had bombardments going for days on end, you can imagine that 25% of those artillery shells were coming from right here. This is a map of the entire area that was bought by the Atlantic Loading Company. Atlantic Loading Company was founded in 1917 in the state of Maine. And on March 4th, they got 6,000 acres, which is this outside line here, of property down in the Pines of New Jersey, because it was far away from people. Okay? They bought that to build a loading plant to make ammunition that ranged from hand grenades all the way up to 8-inch coastal artillery shells and 150 and 200-pound bombs that they dropped from airplanes. Within the boundary of this 6,000 acres, ultimately there was 50 miles of standard gauge railroad track. They started out with 31 miles, and that was all down here in the plant section, and one little railroad track that went out here to the city. They built the city because they expected 20,000 people here to work the plant. That would have made Amatol the second largest city in South Jersey in 1918. Each one of these little black dots on here represent various magazines, warehouses, electrical plants, headquarters building, and everything else. And this little tiny dot down here by the letter A, that's the state police barracks. So you can imagine how big this is. This road out here going past, this is Elwood-Weekstown Road. And you've got Columbia Road going up through here. Columbia Road went right through the middle of the TNT storage area. In order for you to use Columbia Road, you had to go through a checkpoint that was guarded by rifles and submachine guns. So you then got escorted to the other side, but you went through the same gate on the other side to get away from all the guns and the explosions. In addition to building the plant, they had a city. This is a map of the city of Amatol. Currently, in this section right here is where Mullica Township has their Green Acres football fields and soccer fields and baseball fields. I don't know if you've ever been out there. Similar to the ones that are just up the road here. And right in around here, there's a little tiny cemetery that I believe it's called Laurel Hill or something like that. It's a little tiny cemetery from back in the 1800s. But this whole city was all planned out with major streets, highways. This was a proposed extension of the railroad that would come in one side and go out and around the other instead of just coming in, picking up people and backing up. They had electrical plants, they had water supplies, they had, let's see, there was hospitals, there was schools planned. Only the ones that are black dots were the ones that they built, which is quite a few, and all the ones that are sort of shaded were never really built. They had dormitories for the workers, they had dormitories for the executives, because the executives didn't come down here with their families, didn't have time to. They just got here and got things going. They started clearing the land on the 4th of March, 1918. The first artillery shell that was prepared was in the 75 millimeter, the good old French 75s that they used in World War I. And the first one was made the 4th of July, 1918. So from the 4th of March to the 4th of July, they put together enough of the ammo plant to make shells. And by the end of, December in 1918, they had finished their complete requirement. Of course, they expected to keep on going because the war was just going and going and going. But November 11th happened and the war stopped. So what do we do with all this? Close it. Get rid of it just like the government does today. You know, we don't need it anymore. But I'm going to show a few pictures here. These are some pictures. I'll drop down so people don't have to look through me. These are some pictures of the buildings that were over at the city site. They had two general administration buildings. They had the administration building over the city site, which was sort of like the mayor and council and everybody to run the city, which is this building here. And the administration for the plant was the state police headquarters building. Got the wrong button. All right. And this is a photograph that my aunt had taken when she was working there. She was working in one of the offices as a secretary. I believe at that time she was had just turned 18 years old. And these are some of the houses. And on the bottom of the original photograph it says Charlie and somebody else, and we can't really read it because it's all faded out in the ink. This is one of the main streets, F Street, that was going down through the town. And you can see all the streets were like every other street around here, gravel or mud, whichever came first. In the downtown section now, if you go out by the ball fields, back behind the ball fields, you'll come up to a gravel pit that the city used. And in that gravel pit, you'll find a huge chunk of concrete, about half the size of this room, and probably about 15, 20 feet tall. That was a foundation for that water tower. And this building here was, as it says there, the executive's dormitory. And then you had general dormitories for all the other people. And you had houses. You had duplex houses like these two houses. Can everybody see that? Yeah. We can turn the lights out probably if you want. Some of these photographs are actually taken from the book that your Historical Society has. So, okay, that makes it a little easier. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. And as you can see, it had two doors there, and each one of the houses had 5 rooms, they said. This is getting down towards the middle of town. This is your bank building, and also the post office along the side. And if you notice the types of windows that they had on the bottom floor, you always had the large glass windows, and then the oblong rectangular windows across the top. They seem to be very prevalent throughout all the city buildings that weren't used for housing. They also had a couple of YMCAs, and this is one of the interior swimming pools that was being built for the YMCA. So you had a lot of recreation going on. And if you needed to eat, you went to the main mess hall. Now the main mess hall was this huge building out here. They could serve 6,000 people at the main mess hall for lunch and 6,000 for dinner. Can you imagine the size of that place? And then you've got the workers out here. Of course, you know what the workers are doing? Gardening. Taking care of all the tomato plants that are growing out here. They grow their own vegetables. They had a piggery with over 300 pigs that they use for food, and constantly, importing things. And if you didn't like what was at the main mess hall, you had a cafeteria too. And I don't have the statistics on how many people could be served in that, but it looks like a pretty substantial building too. Yeah. And here's another one of the main streets. You can see that it wasn't all flat like everybody seems to think it is down here. There are a few hills here and there in South Jersey.
What material was used to build those buildings?
Pardon me?
What's the material in those buildings? Is it
The majority of the buildings were wood framed, but they used what they called a stucco wire mesh lath.
okay?
And the stucco was actually just sand and cement, sort of a little bit, a little bit sandier than the mortar that you get between your bricks.
Okay, thank you.
Now this right here, this is the main thing in the center of town. This is Liberty Court. Liberty Court, like I said, you look at these windows and you get the little ones and the big ones down below. Liberty Court had a boardwalk on both sides here, and these little slanted lines here are covers over top of the doorways going into various stores. There were haberdasheries, there was women's clothing, there was all kinds of stores in there. And at the end of the court was this big building here. That was the theater. The theater, which I'll show you in a few minutes, was a huge place. You can't believe that they would have something like this built. And keep in mind, this was built between March and July of the same year. This is a photograph my aunt took of some of her friends at the stores. You can see the slanted roof I was talking about, and there are those big windows and the little ones across the top. So, the public buildings. And this is a picture right here. The tall one in the middle is my aunt. I mentioned that if you look at her legs compared to the woman next to her that's sitting on the railing there, my aunt had real skinny legs. They were so skinny that her nickname in high school was Spindles. Okay? We shortened it to Aunt Spins. But she was also about 5'10", and she played on the Egg Harbor City girls basketball team in 1916.
They had a team?
Oh yeah, yeah. We had the name of a few of them there. The one that's to the left of her, the second one up, her name was Chubbs. This is the theater. Now, if you look at that theater, for one thing, it seated 950 people. Where's a theater around here that seats 950 people, even before the multiplexes? I mean, the only one that possibly could have done that was the Berlin one. If you took all the theater seats together, maybe 900. But it had an interesting thing of the way the construction was. This is the stage. It had a sunken orchestra pit, a real pit for the orchestra to be in. Movie screen for, Rudolph Valentino and whoever else was going then. And this is the organ console up here. Looking from the stage to the back, if you could see this on a real photograph, not a digital reproduction of a dot matrix print, these are all the pipes from the organ. You can barely make out the little throats here in the pipes. And those are right behind this section. The whole idea is that we open up the shutters in here and we can have outdoor concerts. I mean, they thought of all kinds of things in 1918. We think we have some wonderful stuff going, Yes?
But this was never inhabited.
Oh yeah, it was inhabited.
They had actual movies and things there?
Yeah. Yeah.
For a couple months?
This is all used for only a few months, but it was all used. If you go out there today where some of the houses were, you can tell where they are. You will find some chunks of concrete, but you'll also find hundreds and hundreds of daffodils and lilies of the valley spread all over that was planted around the houses. Yes?
Who financed all this?
The Atlantic Loading Company.
Oh, okay.
Ultimately, the U.S. government.
Okay.
But Now this is the plant again. I just wanted to go over real quick the sections. There's two railroad tracks down here. You had the West Jersey and Seashore Line, which is the Pennsylvania Railroad down here, and at the very bottom you had the Atlantic City Railroad, which was the Reading Railroad. And they had junctions that went between the two railroads, and then there's this loop that went out that you could bring in rail cars to go either west or east from either direction. Best I could say is this loop right here is just about at the entrance to the old Circus Drive-In. And then if you go east of the headquarters building, there's one little place in the woods, maybe about 100 yards past the state police barracks. You'll see all of a sudden it just drops like that. That's the cut for this railroad to go in here. The idea was if you had things coming in, you came in like this, you went up here. If you had coal, you dropped it off over here at the generating plant. If you had various items for the ammunition plant, you would bring it in and you would go along these rails out here, which came around in a loop. You brought in the empty shells and artillery materials in here, and you brought in the TNT in here, and then everything went through and came out here as loaded shells, and then you went up here and you went over here and you stored them in the completed round storage magazine. Remember I said the ammonium nitrate fertilizer? Okay. They stored that over here. Then they had miscellaneous storage. Miscellaneous storage means just about anything you could want. You had detonators, you had boosters, you had shell cases, you had artillery shells themselves. They were all stored here before they went into the plant itself. Not only did they make the projectiles, but they also made the artillery rounds, the entire thing with the case and the artillery projectile. So you needed smokeless powder, and that was stored over here. And then to make Amatol, you had to have TNT. So they put TNT way out here on Columbia Road. In between, they had a camp, okay? I think that says Camp Columbia. That was a cavalry camp. Down here, right in here, this area, this is also a cavalry camp. This is about where Mary's Road Market used to be. I don't forget what they call it now. But the last of the road markets over here coming from Egg Harbor. And they had the Army's mess hall was here, and also the Quartermaster Corps was over in here. This is about the area where you go into Wharton Park today. Oh, they also had a telephone exchange. If you've ever been over at the State Police Barracks, there's a parking lot was to the west. They always had the state troop cars in there. That's where the telephone exchange was. The telephone exchange had 395 telephones for the city. That was probably more telephones than most of the other cities in the area, except maybe Atlantic City had. Question?
Whereabouts would the Moss Mill Road sit in relation to that now?
Moss Mill Road, let me see if I can, I don't think it's on there, but basically Moss Mill Road went through right about here, okay? Today, this is the chemical lab. This is where they did all the chemical testing to make sure everything was correct with water. Ammonium nitrate sucks up water, and when it sucks up water, it doesn't work as well. It had its benefits for artillery shells, because after 5 to 10 years, sitting in the ground, if it didn't go off, it would suck in the water and would start to decompose, and then it wouldn't work anymore. So it had its benefit. TNT sits in the ground for 100 years and it still goes bang. But Chem Lab is at the end of the section just before Sailor Boy Road, and that's what this is here. This is old Sailor Boy Road. And it comes to here, so this road, this right here is probably Moss Mill Road, it's just not extended on beyond on the picture. Now, this is a whole series of photographs of some of the buildings that were out there. So you can see that it wasn't just a paper city. This one section is the smokeless powder magazines. Each one of those buildings, let's see, each magazine had enough powder that would load up 240,000 75mm shells. And the smokeless powder magazines, I believe there was 20 of them. So 20 times 240,000, you know, you're talking 40 million shells that they could load up out there. And this is these powder magazines. What's interesting is that if you can see this well enough, these little lines here with the dots, those are the water lines, and there are fire hydrants all along the way. So if they had a fire, they could put them out. And then these lines in here, they had lighting, electric lights all along inside, so it was lit all of the night, so you can see if somebody's coming to blow the place up. This is just representative of what the maps were like. This book that we got a lot of the information from has each map for each section, so you can see them. And I was told that your historical society has that book. So if you drop by sometime, you could probably take a look at it. The ammonium nitrate. If you go out today in the woods, don't get chased off by somebody, all you'll find is the bottom section of these buildings. This is all solid concrete, the base. This was all stucco, and this was all just corrugated metal. The idea being, if it's going to blow, let it blow up. If people are inside of a room and the explosion goes off, if the flame doesn't get you, then it's what you call overpressure. All the explosive force crushes every one of your internal organs. Okay? If we can get all that force to go up instead of be retained inside by the walls and ceiling and everything else, you got a pretty good chance of surviving. So they made these walls of the thin metal lath with cement on them and the roof so it would blow up. Luckily, they didn't have any of those problems. And if you go in and see what's there today, you'll see the floor, which has a asphalt base to it. And you'll see all these big circles in the asphalt in the floor. That's because they just put these barrels right straight on the asphalt, and they sunk into the asphalt in the summertime. Because if you remember, this thing started work in the summer, and you know, it got kind of hot there. Another thing that you'll find in there on the floor if you go today, there might still be some little pieces of metal, maybe about 4 inches long, and they're slightly curved. They were these little pieces that fit into grooves inside the barrels to help hold the barrels together. So those are a few of the things you can still find. Another thing, there was down at the 75mm plant several years ago, round metal discs with 3 little fingers that looked like they stuck against something. Well, I found out by researching that these were the shipping caps when they sent the artillery shells, and they would be outside the building, and they just knock them off, and had a big pile, must have been about a foot thick, of all these little end caps off of the cardboard tubes for shipping. And the TNT storage. You can go out and probably see the bases of them. Again, you'll notice that all of the buildings, the slope of the outside walls Basically, what it is you've got the shock wave coming from an explosion, and you want it to focus up and away from your building so it doesn't blow the other building away. But because TNT was such a high explosive, in the lower sections, you can see they started building sand barricades around each one of the buildings too. And that would also help deflect any of the explosions. Miscellaneous storage buildings, okay? These storage buildings are 46 feet by 260 feet long. Inside each one of these storage buildings, it says down at the bottom, if you can't read it, it says one storage building will hold 350,000 rounds of 75 millimeter shells. Or it will hold 2,250,000 boosters. Now a booster is what you have to screw onto the end of your fuse. The fuse uses black powder, and then that goes bang, and it goes into a thing full of a compound called tetrol, which is a high explosive, and then that goes kaboom, and then that's what sets off the shell that's inside with the TNT. And I don't want to even say how loud that goes. Completed rounds, that was that section way up in the north end, okay? There were quite a few of those buildings. I can't remember how many there were. There was something like about 4 rows of 11, I believe. And the picture down at the bottom shows all the 75 millimeter shells stacked up in boxes along with the ones in the center, all the boxes. And the center one has drop bombs. Okay, what they did is they also made bombs for their airplanes. And each one of these buildings, again, is 46 feet wide and 260 feet long. And on the bottom right side is a storage building with 50,155 millimeter shells. Those are the things we use over there in Iraq right now, the big guns, okay? They will take out half a city block if it hits in the right spot. And you've got 50,000 of them in one building. Then they had all sorts of other warehouses. And the one center bottom, that warehouse there, nothing but nuts and bolts. So you can see they had a bunch of nuts and bolts they needed. They had, there's a warehouse full of food, there's a commissary storage, there's one down the lower left corner is for electrical supplies, the one up above it is pipe, and then you got general warehouse, which had everything from wheelbarrows and shovels and everything else that you needed. This is a general plan of how they built the things with the steel. And there was 6,000 tons of steel used to make the buildings. Some more of the general plants buildings here. As you can see, some of the railroad. They also had safety concerns. TNT is an organic compound which can give you severe headaches, raises your blood pressure, actually give you strokes. So you didn't want to take all this stuff home if you had, you were going home to your kids, or if you were going into a dormitory situation with a whole bunch of other guys with the TNT. I mean, you don't want to take more TNT back there and get everybody's headaches going. So the company came up with a great idea. Let's build showers for all of our workers that are working in the plant. When you come in, you would have a basket, and the basket would have a number, and you would take your clothes and put your street clothes in there, and you would get one of these little metal tags. And one of those metal tags would stay on the basket. And the other one you put in your pockets, and it would have a number on it, so you knew which number to pull down. And when you used the rope to send up the basket with your clothes in, the basket from up in the ceiling came down with the coveralls you were going to wear at work. when you got finished working, you came in through and you got your showers, and you went over and you got your clothes by putting the old coveralls in there, hoisting the ladder up, hoist the rope up, and your clothes would come back down nice and clean, not full of TNT. And then somewhere magically the next day, somebody had already laundered all these work clothes, and it's nice and clean again without the TNT. So they kept the, the headaches down quite a bit. I'm not exactly sure where we got those from, but I know some of the kids that were living out there in the housing development had found the old city dump, and they were digging up those things left and right. And they also had some of the badges with actual photographs of some of the people still there. There was separate ones for men and women. You can see the women had separate showers and dressing cubicles, while the men, well, the men were men. They all hopped into the communal shower. And maintenance buildings, you had mechanical buildings, you had plumbers, you had wood shops, anything and everything. There was a tool room where you could find just about any tool you needed to work on some of the things there. Now, the other part that's in your book, this is an actual photograph of that page. It says plant operation. This is the stuff they made. And the bomb on the right-hand side, that's 36 inches tall, so you see it wasn't small. There's mortar shells. There's what we call fixed rounds. Up in the fixed round has the cartridge case and has the artillery unit up here. Then you had just the projectiles. This is probably a 8-inch artillery shell. And all the little stuff in here are the detonators and the boosters that were put in there in the bottom. And this one right here is a drop bomb. It has the fuse in here and has the booster. This is a screw-on booster, so you can take the tetrol off if you're trying to defuse it. And
Do you have a question, Anthony?
pardon me?
Yeah, I think there's a question back there.
At the height of operation, how many people were in this community?
They designed it for 25,000. How many actually got there to work? I'm really not sure, but I estimate probably around 10,000 people were working in one phase or the other, either building or whatever. The only two I really know about is my aunt, who was a secretary, and my uncle, who was a carpenter. But,
For sure.
those are the only ones I know for sure. Now, I've heard of some other people here. Your grandfather or your father? Your father, what?
Worked with take the coal to the furnace.
Oh, coal to the furnace, to the generators?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was all kinds of jobs that you could get. Her father was making 75 cents an hour, which was huge money back in 1918. I mean,
Mark, I have a silly question, but did the township of Mullica and Hammonton know that if this place was ever hit, we would not have Mr. Bertino here with us tonight? I mean, think about what would...
there was no right to know law back then.
So nobody knew that this was even going on back there?
Oh, I'm sure they knew, but I don't think that they fathomed how big it was and what could happen.
They were lucky for the jobs.
Yeah, in 1926 there was a explosion over in a depot up in North Jersey, and it wiped out a couple of square miles, But and then there was also during World War I, there was sabotage of in the Earl Depot up in North Jersey. Out, they had all the storage of the rounds there, and they were shipping them out. And they were out on one of those big, long railroad piers that went out into the Hudson. And somebody set off a detonator inside one of those and blew up a whole trainload of ammo. And it blew out windows in Brooklyn. So you can imagine, this would do just about the same thing.
And I asked this question this afternoon, who are these people?
Where do they come from?
Where did these people come up with the designs of these places back in the early?
A lot of engineers. If you look in the front, this right here, this is a copy. Some guy went through, I think he was an engineer, and he copied just the first part of the book. If you look in the front part of the book, it lists all the people that worked there, and gives a brief history of some of the executives and so on. I know that in researching this, I found a section from the Alumni Association of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And there were a bunch of them that work in here, of their alumni. So it was no, fly-by-night outfit.
It doesn't sound it.
It wasn't a mom and pop store, I'll tell you that much right now.
So, and you're saying that when the war ended, all this just disappeared?
Yeah.
It just stopped?
Well, they stopped making active ammunition, I think it was in February of 1919. They still had people here maintaining the facilities and some of the equipment and so on until 1924, when there was only 2 people left taking care of all 6,000 acres. At that point, they went through, I'll tell you, this is something too, that you think that they kept an eye on things. There's a report in 1924 to the Army that said after they got ready to decommission the whole place, they had people come in and sweep up and clean, make sure everything was away. They found 4,000 pounds of TNT lying in the cracks of the floors and everything else. They found some artillery shells that fell off the conveyors. By the way, each one of those little buildings that was in the production plant, there was a totally enclosed conveyor belt system that was heated. When you got a shell in, well, you'll see it in here. One of the first things they do is you get the empty shell cases. Okay, you receive the empty shell cases, and then you take them out of the take the shipping plug out. Now this is to keep dirt and water out of there. Okay, then they put them in to the preheating conveyor belt, ran them through the preheater. It then came over here to where they cleaned them. You had every one of them had a lot of oil because they machined them. So you had to get the oil out because that would degrade the explosive. Okay? From there, I'm sorry, I went backwards. They would clean them then to the preheating. The preheating would heat up the shell. So we get up warm to about the same temperature of the TNT. By the way, TNT is not just a little powder you pour in. TNT for them was 8,000 pounds in a big steam pot. You had to melt it. And then you went around, and each guy would go out here and he'd get a bucket. One of these buckets looks like a watering bucket, full of molten TNT. You then had all the shells standing up on the floor with a little rubber cone in it. You pour the TNT into it until it fills up the cone. Now, the big thing is that you have to worry about the shrinkage as the shell is starting to cool off. If it shrinks too fast, it'll crack, and the cracks are never right. They always go all over the place. And what happens is when you have a shell going down a barrel that's perfectly symmetrical, it spins and it hits where you want it to. If it's got a lump on one side, do you ever see a basketball that's got, like a little bit of lead shot in it that the Globetrotters use, and they roll it down the floor and flip. Well, that's what your shell would do, and you won't know where that thing's going to go. So you have to be very careful with that. In the smaller shells, they did this with the cone because it would let it suck in some of the molten TNT. Also, air works on the molten TNT and it causes a different type of crystal. And the crystallization as it's setting up inside the shell would start to crack and throw it off too. So they have these cones, they fill them up. When they're ready to go, they knock the cones off and then they can remelt the TNT again and put it back into the original state. This whole floor in here is nothing but shells that are cooling off. You want it to cool slowly, so they had these big heated rooms that the shells cooled off in. Now you have a shell that's filled up all the way up with your TNT. You got to get your booster back inside. So you have all these guys in here with drill presses drilling TNT out so you can put your booster in. Then you had to go in here, and inside the neck of each one of these is the screw threads to screw the booster in. You got to scrape out all the TNT out of the threads. Okay? Then you go in here and you do what these women are doing here. It's called gauging. You have a gauge block, and you put it inside, and you make sure that the gauge block goes all the way down. If it doesn't, you have to send it back and get more drilled out, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to screw in your booster charge right. And let me see, what is he doing here? I believe he is, if I could read that. Oh, inserting, yeah, he's inserting the booster charge into the shell. So he's screwing that in. Then what you had to do is you had to weigh them. And there was a specific, weight, plus or minus, that you could be in. And that you had to be sure it was, because if you had a light shell, it would go farther. If you had a heavy shell, it wouldn't go as far, and you wouldn't be hitting where you're supposed to be aiming. Yes?
They weighed each and every shell?
Each and every shell.
How long did that take?
It only took a few seconds, because you just picked it up and put it on there.
You're talking about thousands and millions.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Now you notice another thing too. This right in here, this is a conveyor belt. There's the conveyor belt. This is where the shells go, and this is where you get them. And when you're finished, you put them back on the conveyor belt. Now these are only the 75s. If you got the 8-inch ones, they were huge. You didn't drill them like this. You actually put the shell on a table that's had rollers and would roll it around, and you just put a gouge in like a what's it called, a lathe for doing wood turning. Just put a gouge in to gouge the stuff out, and you'd be standing there with all this TNT falling everywhere. All right, you guys saw first.
I have a question. With all this explosive stuff, is there any record of the number of accidents that happened? I can't imagine they went unscathed.
There are a few accidents.
A few?
Yeah, there were only a couple. They were recorded in the Hammonton News.
Oh, really?
Only a couple.
They're the ones they
And I
talk
don't
about.
believe there was a fatality in any of them.
That was only a few months ago.
Now, yes,
Did they work this plant 24/7
I haven't found that out yet. I don't know
in
if
order to do all of this?
yeah, I really don't know if it was an 8-hour or a 10-hour job, or if they had it going 24/7. Yes,
Were, is it similar to the military, were the employees given mess privileges and housing free?
that I don't know either. I can only go what little material I have from the book, and I don't believe that they said, if you paid for it, or if you were a company town, and,
Mark, was this place, let's say on Saturday night we want to go out on a date. Now we're going to go down to this theater.
okay.
Can people from Hammonton just go to this theater?
Oh, yeah.
This was not a community that was in itself.
No, it was not a
People
closed
could go
community.
in there.
It was not a closed community.
Okay.
The only thing that was really closed was what was within that barbed wire fence.
The barbed wire fence.
Yeah. So the community, which was on Elwood, Weekstown Road, people could go there. Now, they didn't all go there. They also came to the hot spot, Egg Harbor City.
Oh.
Yeah. All those winemakers, okay, and all those beer makers down there. We've got a list of 97 people who were making wine in Egg Harbor City. And it ranged from, a couple of barrels for home on the table throughout the year to Renault and Dewey and Bonnier, and making tens of thousands of gallons. And I'll tell you a real quick short story. We had a member of our society that passed away a couple years ago, Ethel Resch. She died at the age of 105 and was sharp as any tack I've seen around. So she used to wake up in the morning and before she would go to breakfast, she said she'd randomly pick a block in the city, start in lot 1 and go through the people that owned that house, then go to lot 2 and all the people. When she got around to the end, then she'd go to work to breakfast. And I rarely found a mistake when she would tell me a name of someone that lived in the house. Rare. Anyway, she told the story of one time a bunch of the cavalry guys came to town and they were raising a real ruckus. Well, our marshal stuck them into the city jail, which we still have. Our city jail, yeah, I think it's like 12 feet by 12 feet. Okay, you had to shut the front door in order to open up the cage. Okay, they put something like 20 guys into this little cage, 12 by 12 foot cage, and locked the door. And the door was really locked. It was one of these big old bolts that went across, and then they put a padlock on the outside, so nobody could come by and open it up. You know, you can imagine what, you know, OSHA and ACLU would say about that one today. All of a sudden, somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, a few of these guys started to sober up enough to realize, shit, we got reveille in a couple hours. What are we going to do? You know? They all got together and they lifted the roof off of the jailhouse. It was a cinder block jailhouse with a little roof on top. So it was easy enough to lift it up. They got the shortest guy to go through the open spot. He went out, scoured up some timbers, knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I'm back." Okay. They all lifted up the one edge of the roof and he started propping up the roof with all these timbers. All the guys got out, pulled all the timbers out, put them back where they got from, and they made reveille. The marshal comes in and the lock's still on the door, but nobody's home. Going back to this, you can see there, this is where they're, again, loading all of the materials to, like they're putting the primers into the cartridge cases now, okay? These are the cases that you put the gunpowder in to make the bullet go out. I know that wasn't the right technical way, but what the heck. And then after they did that, they stamped a lot number on the base of the shells, so they knew when it was loaded, where it was loaded, and basically, you know, if there's something wrong with this lot, we don't want to use these anymore. Then they started filling the cases here with powder. And then, of course, you had the people that had to check the powder charge. And they weighed every one of them, too. Then they took it on down to this guy who assembled the cartridge case and the shell and the projectile and squeezed them together to make the one completed round. After that, they had to paint the rounds because they didn't want them to become corroded on the way over the ocean. And they stenciled the completed round with a number on it for the lot number and so on. And then they placed the round in those little cardboard containers I told you about and put them little metal caps on the end again. And then they painted them shut with shellac to keep the moisture out. And then they sent them off to the packaging group here, going down another conveyor belt again, putting them in the cases, and then the cases went out for shipping. Now, that concludes the part that I wanted to tell you about the Amatol plant. Okay, there was a lot of different size shells. There was 75s, 40s, millimeters. There was 4.7 inch. There was 6 inch. There was 8 inch. There was drop bombs and everything. All of them had their own individual plant. And they were set up that they could do 2 different size shells within the plant. So if one section went down from a fire or explosion, they could move over to the other plant and still keep their production going. This is an aerial photograph taken somewhere around 1927, 28. And you can see this is the completed round section. This is the ammonium nitrate section, miscellaneous storage. Way out here is the TNT, and off the edge here is the city. And each one of these lines here, these were the railroad lines coming in. And that little building there is the state police headquarters building. So you can see that it's quite a ways off. And this right here, this wide strip, which I don't know what it was originally for, that was the entranceway to the Circus Drive-In. So that gives you an idea of where that was. This is Burdick's. Okay, that's Burdick's bus stop. And this was the train stop here where the train came in and dropped people off. And this is the racetrack. Okay, now, majority of that information I do not have stuck in my mind yet. So I'm going to refer to a couple of notes that I took. In 1926, Charles M. Schwab. Okay, now everybody's heard of Charles Schwab, the banker? No relation. He's Charles R., this is Charles M. Charles M. was an industrialist. To give you an idea how much of an industrialist, he was president of Carnegie Steel. He then wangled a deal with J.P. Morgan to buy Carnegie Steel. But I'll let you buy it if you make me president of your new company, U.S. Steel. Well, a couple of years later, he got into a tiff with some of the people at U.S. Steel, and he took his money and he went out and bought another one, Bethlehem Shipbuilding and Steel. So, you know, the man was well-heeled, knew what he was doing. He was the guy that built this. Him and 3 other guys who I can't find anywhere. Don't know what they did. I imagine they were in the steel business, but he's the only one that shows up when you try and search him. And they hired a guy named Jack Prince from Oakland, California, to build this oval track. The oval track was originally being built by Prince because he knew how to build bicycle racing tracks. He was a bicycle racer and a motorcycle racer. So he built this entire track, which is 1.5 miles all the way around, using southern hemlock and a type of spruce, which I've never really been able to figure out, Engelmann spruce. Anybody know what Engelmann spruce is? Must be some sort of a special, you know, dense spruce or something. But he got 2x10s, 10 foot long. Now this information I got from Clyde Birdsell. Some of you might remember him.
Yeah.
He was the tax collector up here in Mullica.
Right.
When he was a young kid, I think he said he was 8 or 9 years old, he was a nail boy. Now the nail boy went down to a hogshead, which is a huge barrel full of nails, 16 penny nails. And he would get bags full of 16 penny nails and take them to the carpenters. The carpenters would take those nails and drive them through the 2x10s, which are standing on edge. So each time you put a board down, you're only adding 2 inches, nominally, probably about 1 3/4 inches, right? 1 3/4 inches to the width of this track. The width was 50 feet wide, so how many 2x10s did you have to make to put, you know, 50 feet wide? Not only that, 10 feet long all the way around the circle. I estimate that there was somewhere around the order of 250,000 2x10x8s or 2x10x10s to make that track. All told, they estimated at 4.5 million board feet. Now a board foot is something that's 12 by 12 and 1 inch thick. These started out 1 and 2 inches, so you can imagine 4.5 million board feet went into making that. Then they had another guy came in, and along here is a grandstand. The grandstand used 1.5 million board feet. It was 75 feet in the air and seated 60,000 people. 60,000 coming to the race. Of course, they also had standing room for 250,000 more. The day that they opened up, it's recorded that they expected 30,000 people to show up. They had 60,000 show up. The police department was a little bit upset because they had parking. This was all graded out to be parking, and they had this out here for parking, and people were afraid they wouldn't find their cars. Now, I mean, you know, what's so hard about finding your car? Model Ts were all black. You know, Model As were about the same thing. So it was kind of hard to figure out what was your car. People started picking out where they were parking along the White Horse Pike, knowing that's where we can find our car. Well, the police got very upset and they said, no, not again. So they came up with plans. There was going to be the road, which here, by the way, this is what's called Moss Mill Road going through here on this line. They widened Moss Mill Road to 66 feet. It had been like 35 or 40 feet wide. Mud, of course. They also got the Pennsylvania Railroad to come down. They built the train station down here, which they named Speedway, New Jersey. They had special trains, 10, 15 trains a day when the races were going, coming down to drop people off. They don't say how many cars were there. But we know one thing for sure, there was plenty of rail track in the old city and the old munitions plant. The munitions plant originally had 50 miles of trains, railroad, standard gauge. They had 10 locomotives and 30 passenger cars just to service their workers. But now you've got trains coming in here, and this right down here, that's the railroad track, and this is the White Horse Pike going across. They also had an interconnection with the Reading, because by this time the Reading was just about ready to shut down because Pennsylvania had taken them over. It became the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Line. So in other words, they built this grandstand, and that used 1.5 million board feet. So that's a total of 6 million board feet of lumber. And the information I got, they said that is enough to fill 253 railroad cars full of lumber. Now you can imagine a train coming in that stretched well beyond probably Winslow and pulling up here to drop off some lumber. The parking, like I said, the parking was solved by telling them they're going to tow everybody away if they park on a White Horse Pike. They got the train station to bring people in, and then they got Burdick's. They built that as a rest stop and food and water, and also a gasoline pumping station for the Philadelphia Rapid Transit Company, which ran special buses down here too. So anyway, they continued on with the racing. My grandfather and my father both used to tell me about when the races were racing out here, you could hear them all the way over in Lower Bank. So it was not a quiet thing. And then, let me see, in 1928 is the last time they ran the races.
Oh, these were cars.
Yeah, these were cars. They also ran motorcycles.
Never bicycles that the track was built for,
No.
or that the man knew about.
No, never did that one. But the track you can see right here was 50 feet wide. Now that's the pitched end of the track. You can see where this is fairly flat here, but it goes up. And this was pitched up almost a 45-degree angle to keep the cars from going off. Now, at one time, the race drivers preferred our track to Indianapolis, because Indianapolis was built out of bricks, and what happens with bricks when they get wet? They get slippery, and you slide off the track, and there you go. So they liked our track here. And this is another shot taken from the grandstand. You can see right over here, over the scoreboard here. Right in here, you can see this is the normal pitch of the track here, and all of a sudden it starts going up and going up and going up. And you haven't even gotten to the end where it's really up over here. There's about 12 world records set for 91 cubic inch engines. That was a big engine in those days. And there's a bunch of other world records set here. To give you an idea of some of the people, you had people named Jack Abel, Eddie Backer, Ralph De Palma, Frank Elliott, Harry Hartz, and Dr. William Shattuck, which were really big names in racing throughout the early teens and 20s. And then, of course, the cars. You had the Miller, you had Duesenbergs, Auburns, Ducatis, Stutz Bearcats, and Nortons, who was made by the motorcycle people. And the first prize was $30,000.
Wow.
Now, your father was making 75 cents an hour? That's why people like to go racing. And this is a picture here of the race cars getting ready to go. And that's the grandstand in the background, so you can see how high up they were looking at the pictures. As time went on, the track just became a tumble-down shambles of itself. When they started racing the motorcycles, the motorcycle wheels had studs on them, and they started tearing up the wood. And the problem with the guys is as they're tearing up the wood, you didn't want to be behind somebody, because the splinters are flying out, and you're getting the splinters in your hands, arms, legs, and everything else. So after a while, they got rid of the motorcycles and never did them again. But by that time, the damage had already been done. And I forget how many carpenters, Clydes, that they employed going out there to repair and replace these 2x10s. In order to do that, you had to cut through with 10-inch, studs, and then replace big sections, not just one that was bad. And they used to start at a race that was like a 100-mile race, and it would take you all day because of the stops that you'd have to go to replace the surface. And that basically was why they went back to the brickyard. Brickyard then started to slope their turns at the end, and you didn't have to replace bricks like you had to wood. And by 1928, they closed the place down. 2 years of racing. After it was closed down, they sold the lumber to anybody that wanted it. So when you look around and find 2x10s out there with holes in the side, in your old houses, you can more or less guarantee that it was part of the old racetrack. And shortly after that, when nobody else wanted any more wood, you got to realize, 6 million board feet is a lot of wood to sell. The Hammonton Fire Department came to the rescue. They burned it down.
Yep. Had a party.
And they had a party, and they practiced putting fires out. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is about all I can really say about, the life of the shell loading and racetrack era here in the Pines, racing in the Pines.
Yeah.
The only other thing is that we still hear rumbles once in a while, especially on a nice quiet night in the summer. We can hear Atco go crazy with the Art Fonz used to come out here with his J47 jet engine and stuff. Any more questions? Yeah.
Why did they stop racing?
Why did they what?
Stop the racing.
Again, it was just because, not necessarily stop racing, period, but they stopped it here on the wood track because the tracks were just too expensive to keep up. And you had Indianapolis, which by now was becoming the preeminent racetrack in the country, if not the world. Yes,
The company that you said was from Maine,
that's the Shell owning company.
are they still in business?
No.
No.
Yes.
On the finished product, how is that taken to either the airport or the seaport? By truck or by rail?
You mean the artillery shells and stuff?
Right.
By rail. It all went by rail. You would go up here to Winslow and hook into the central New Jersey and go up to the that pier I told you that blew up.
Atlantic Islands?
Yeah. Or you go over here in Philly. Yes.
Who owns it now? You said that you cannot,
Okay.
people can throw you out?
Yeah. Let me see here a minute.
I don't know what. Ticks, I don't know what.
So, no, they own.
I believe it's number 20. Okay, well, this is the map here. There is a wildlife preserve, the Hammonton Wildlife Preserve. It goes roughly through here. Okay? And then beyond this is all privately owned. There's a guy that has a house built here, and he closed off Sailor Boy Road, which I didn't know you could close off a road that was on the map for how many years and still in use. But they closed off Sailor Boy Road, and he has a house in here, and in the Christmas season, he lights up the old walls of the chemistry lab. And the chem lab was interesting too. There's only 2 walls. The other walls were blowout walls, so if an explosion happened there, they would blow out and the guy would survive inside the chem lab.
Do you know how Sailor Boy Road got its name?
I don't really know. It went go way back into the Revolutionary War
I
period.
taught in Mullica Township schools, and we had one teacher, his name was Bill Hawthorne. He was an art teacher. And he did some, I think he got his master's from that. I wish I knew how to get a hold of him, but he did a lot of research on that and then did etchings of all Sailor Boy Road and the Amatol plant. And all that.
That'd be great things to have for your society.
I can maybe go on the internet and try and go see where he was. But I know he was very enthused, and there was a history behind Sailor Boy Road.
I believe it was a stagecoach road for a while. I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of the places like Berlin was long and coming. It got that name because, you know, when you got on the stagecoach and you were headed down to Tuckerton, you was long and coming before you got there.
Was Amatol ever considered an arsenal? Because I know you manufacture and store.
They were just a manufacturing plant. They didn't store except for storage when it was made and then shipped.
Okay.
So it wasn't really an arsenal, what you would say.
Right, okay.
Not like Picatinny.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
You know, Picatinny, they store a lot of stuff there, but it's not anywhere close to the one that's Earl up in Monmouth County.
Right.
They only store stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Mostly Navy, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Very interesting.
All right, thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you.